Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ray Tampa Podcast. Our podcast offers bold commentary on various subject matters with a laser-like focus on the truth. My name is Ray Tampa, and I'm the host of the Ray Tampa Podcast. We have in our studio two talented and intelligent gentlemen, Mr. Russell Cato and Mr. Jamie Wilson III, my co-host. Also, we're honored and pleased to have in the studio two powerhouse figures in our community, Attorney Michelle LIGON and Bishop Dr. MANUEL SYKES, pastor of Bethel Community Baptist Church, St. Petersburg, as our guests. Attorney LIGON and Dr. SYKES, welcome to the Ray Tampa Podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's good to be here.
Thank you. This evening, our discussion will touch on a number of subjects that are very relevant to the concerns of our community's residents. Very relevant. Attorney LIGON, I'm going to ask you, well, before I get to that point, let me say this to the audience members: sit back, strap in, and relax. You're in for some really deep discussions. Now, Attorney LIGON, to begin, I want to ask you to explain to our audience what is meant by the term affordable housing.
By definition, in the federal code, it relates to the affordability of rent, essentially. And affordability is based on area, median income. So what's the average income in that particular area? And then a percentage of that. And roughly at least at 120% of area median income, they deem that to be affordable. The area median income in this area is just a little bit over $60,000 per year. So if you don't have that type of income, then you fall below that model, and that would qualify you for certain types of subsidized housing.
Okay, excellent. And I do appreciate that. AMI, average medium income, is very important in that discussion as to what's affordable.
And the next step on that, just to be clear, is area median income. So that means that particular to this market, they look at the average rents in the area, they look at the affordability guidelines from a developer standpoint, as well as the tenant and their ability to pay those rents. And that applies across the board in terms of the types of projects that will qualify for certain bond issues and that sort of thing. So,
Okay.
Is that a neighborhood thing, or you're saying that the county, or how does it?
it's by the area as opposed to it being neighborhood specific.
Okay.
Cities, on the other hand, as well as counties, should be looking at neighborhood specific criteria.
Okay.
So the affordability guidelines are then tempered by necessity.
Gotcha.
Are there sufficient housing units in the area to take care of the average income in that particular part of the community? So it's twofold.
Okay, you responded to my next question in part, but I'm going to ask this question of either of you. And the question is, please explain, or the statement says, please explain what city government, state government, and or federal government can do to effectively address the issue of affordable housing.
Many of the criteria that are used to establish what is deemed to be affordable are outdated, and they don't reflect the actual market condition. The actual market condition is what things are being rented for, how many units are available, in what specific area. And that would include things like ADA accessibility as well as ADA adaptability. So there are a number of factors that look at not just income necessarily, but availability of those units. And we try to have a comprehensive plan view every 5 years. Every community does a comprehensive plan to look at all of the infrastructure within the city. Clearly, everything that the city does and has available in the way of programming or services is looked at every 5 years. That then rolls to the county, and then up to from the county to the state, and thereafter to the federal government. And they try to assess the social needs, the economic needs, as well as other types of issues, meaning abilities. And we do that, like I said, on a national level every 5 years. And so each community is then responsible to look more frequently or less frequently based on the type of growth and development that's going on in that particular area.
One
Okay.
thing that I'll add is this. Right now, we have more than 16,000 people that are on the housing authority waiting list, which means then that when it comes to people and the way in which they are located and evaluated, it's off. One of the things that they push so hard is the census, because the census allows the federal government to focus in on areas like places, neighborhoods, for instance, where there's poverty. But what we find is that that's simply an equation to bring money to the area, because it does not solve the problem. And so every census, you have the same data, if not worse, bringing in more money that is then diverted to pet projects. One of the things that, as Michelle said, when you think about a community and you evaluate it for income versus rents and things of that nature, you can quickly see the inequity, because number one, the job availability and salaries, and then the rent in those communities are really out of line.
Mhm.
Now, the question becomes, what do you do about it? Okay, what we have going on here is gentrification. That's one response to it, because it raises the income in that area for the people who can come into that area. They build homes that are much more expensive, and then they drive up the property prices, and people who are there indigenously are left out and pushed out. And the result is you can do a numbers trick. You can say, okay, now this area has this area median income, and the people associated with that area are just fine. But we realize that the underbelly of that is you haven't addressed the needs of a community. You simply push them out.
Right.
You know, it's like a curve on a test at school when they are allowed to remove the ESE children's scores from the school's evaluation. So it looked like you got a great school there, but when the ESE students are left behind, although they bring in the most money. It's the same kind of formula, and it works all the time because it does not include our opinions and so forth, even on the neighborhood level. How many times do our people come to those neighborhood association meetings and our voices are heard and we're part of that planning? Never, or seldom. And for that reason, the city and those that look at the data think they're looking at a community and its voices. The fact of the matter is that it's not. You put one person on there that's vocal and boisterous, and they'll talk for the entire group. And that's when you get the wrong response. Ultimately, trouble, crime are better indicators of what's wrong in an area than what's right, than the economic models, because they don't match.
Awesome. Awesome information. And you went so in depth with the discussion, and I certainly appreciate it. Michelle, you want to comment?
I do. I'd like to chime in if I might. The fundamental error in this is to presume that someone has 120% of area median income to pay towards rent in the first place. 120%. So that means that all of a single person's earnings plus 20% is necessary just for rent. So do you do that without lights? Do you do that without water? Do you do that without any type of transportation? So it predisposes a failure, if you will, in terms of a household's ability to sustain itself. And that's the fundamental challenge that we face right now. These standards have been in place for many years. And the only thing that's really changed is the area median income. But again, that's graded on the curve. And the curve itself, we have to look at to determine what factors should really be included, not just income, because it's certainly in this day and time, a combination of money and power and influence. So if you have a very large number of people in a particular strata, that don't reflect any power, that have very little influence outside of themselves, then you've automatically got a scale that simply just doesn't work.
Okay, you started off by saying that the AMI is outdated.
Right.
And Sykes went into a lot of detail along those lines and pointed out how gentrification affects affordable housing in a very serious way. So I'm going to ask either of you to let's illustrate for our listeners who are aware of St. Petersburg, an area that might fit the description, Pastor Sykes or Attorney LIGON, that you all described. Can you think of a geographical area in our city that fits what you discussed?
Absolutely. It's what is known as South Central St. Petersburg. It's a play on words like South Central LA because it identifies an area that's high crime. The other part of it is the CRA designation, the original one from 5th Avenue South down to what is Michelle, about 36th Avenue South.
It actually stopped at 26th Avenue.
26th Avenue, and then from 49th Street down to 4th Street South. So you have this, and then suddenly the mayor and Carl Nurse decided that it was better for everybody if they moved the boundaries northward over to 1st Avenue North, because supposedly the income that goes into the CRA would be more. Ultimately, the rules of the CRA did not favor people that needed it because initially they had to spend the money in order to be reimbursed, while those who had the money could do whatever they wanted to, knowing it's like a short-term loan. I'll spend it, the city will give it right back. So once again, we got a shell game going on, and you have people in politics. And let me just say this. We have government for a reason. The market is not an abstract person or force out there. The market is what people do that's in power to do it. Our government, while we are not communist or anything else, supposed to be a barrier between capitalistic abuse and freedom of the economy. For instance, all of the city-owned property, we don't even get into the gas plant. The city-owned property is a place where some of the equity can be established rather than it going to developers, as well as properties repossessed by the city for tax liens and so forth. That brings area that are available for them to deal with the housing crisis. And because whoever builds on it does not have to really worry about the city pricing them out of the box and forcing the price up. If we had a city government that was on their, let's just say, on their game and really cared about the people who elected them, we wouldn't have this problem.
You know, great point. Great point. Either of you?
Yeah, it sounds like with this 120%, it's like you say, it needs to be, they need to look at it again, need to take another look at it, because it doesn't seem realistic for the lower income people. And that is basically the segue for gentrification, because you're going to have that. As long as it's unattainable, it's not realistic, you know.
But my question is this, and I'm listening to both of you. This is nothing new, what they're saying. So if it's nothing new and it's been in development for the last 8, 9, 10 years, how do you overcome this? That's my thing.
Is there a plan in place to correct this?
There are a number of plans that are in place to address it, but we need to look at the criteria that they're going to be using to make that assessment. And they're not just financial criteria. You have to look at other types of selection criteria as well. If you look at an age demographic, the needs of a senior are very different than they are for someone in their early 20s. And the same in terms of the number of children that are there in those areas. Do you build a park where there's no kids to play in it? Not necessarily. Or do you allocate city funds to something that is aesthetically beautiful, but not foundational in terms of someplace to live that's safe and clean and sanitary and all those things that are in the basic platform for public housing. We got askew in terms of public housing in the late 60s, early 70s in most cities, and it was later than that here in St. Petersburg. So what we've really got to do is to take a fundamental look at ourselves. And the criteria for design and development actually are pretty sound. But what you don't do in terms of vernacular, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of needs of the particular residents of a part of the community, is to overshadow that with someone forceful sentiment or speech, if you will, that says we need this in this area. So you have to kind of look at it on balance. If you look at the Kenwood area and you look at some of the development in that section, it was pretty much a collection of bungalow style housing. And most of that housing in that area was 2-story. And people choose, to the extent they can, to the extent they have the wherewithal to make a choice, they choose to live in a community or in a neighborhood that fits their taste, their preferences in terms of the style, the vernacular of the structure, how it's built, what it's built of, even landscaping. And so we've kind of gotten a little far afield with that when you have circa 2023 next door to something built in 1926. And as we lose history to gain the contemporary flavor, but there's a way to do it more compatibly, and to do it more compatibly on what money, power, and influence as the divining rod, if you will, in all of this. And so what people need to do is to come together. These little confabs that the city has sponsored throughout the community are very, very important. So you have to show up. You have to not only be physically present, you also have to be verbally present. And then most importantly, you've got to be proactive all the way through the process. And this is something that we've kind of lost sight of. We've lost sight of engagement for the community benefits.
Let me tell you what my plan was. My plan was to support a man from the community who promised equity, who promised to return land to people who were robbed of it, to bring about and to keep lost promises. The plan was to support someone who could get in there and make decisions like he made with the gas plant area. That decision alone could have alleviated a lot of the pressure on this city and would have brought displaced residents back to the heart of the city. Other people on the council, likewise, if you have a council person, they represent a district, but they run citywide, that means they got a citywide responsibility. So what we're looking at then is a group of people and a mayor who promised one thing, particularly in his case, and just didn't do it. When the time came to stand up and do what was necessary to do, what you find out when you go to the council meetings, you find about 8 dudes in expensive suit on the right facing the desk or the dais. And then you got taxpayers filling up the rest of the space. And those 8 or 9 guys over there co-opt every dollar from the city, and they change everything. I believe that there are several reasons for it. Number one, people are intimidated by folk that's got money. Number two, Black folk want to be liked, especially by white folk that's got power. And thirdly, these dudes have a sense of entitlement that they can change the mind of our protective layer of government and make them become bobbleheads and rubber stamps for everything they want to do. The theme of this city has become build it and they will come. Well, what about those that are here?
Oh my God.
And for that reason, we got people moving here. They don't know that they are living in an area that was once populated by people. They don't know that liens and other kinds of things has been assessed on these homes and drove people out. And then when investors get it, suddenly, if they build in so many days, the lien is gone. They don't even understand the land grab that has gone on and will go on, aided and abetted by a city that has no power. If you really want to know where the government of St. Petersburg is, go to the Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you very much. And I tell you what, you two have done such a great job with this affordable housing question. I'm talking a great job. And there are so many other things that we wanted to get to. So I'm gonna hold it at this point. This discussion can go on for another hour and a half, 2 hours, but I need to move on to another subject. And the next subject, I'm gonna ask you, Dr. Sykes. Please, if you don't mind, explain to our listening audience the definition of a food desert.
The definition of food desert in real terms, okay, is not a technical one. What it is an obvious one, where you have a certain amount of square miles where there's no main grocery store, where people generally go to a corner store owned by people that are not from the neighborhood, and they buy a lot of times old and outdated products. They don't have access to fresh meat, fresh vegetables, and the things that are afforded to communities that are not food deserts. Let me give you an example. Between 54th Avenue South and 34th Street South, within a mile, you have two Publix stores. In the same area, we talked about the CRA. If you want to include First Avenue South downtown, there's a Publix. Other than that, people who walk, who don't have transportation, will not have access to any of those fresh products. Now, I'm not making an argument that we need a Publix or any of those franchises. What I'm saying is we are capable, and I know that we have a co-op that's attempting to form, where those fresh vegetables, where those fresh fruit, where the meat is let's just say raised, pasteurized rather than, in an incubator. Mm-hmm. Those things are available to us, and we have Black farmers. We have so many things that could bring those things to our community. But what happens, as it was in the case of Sweet Bay and Walmart, the mindset is we need to be saved. We need the guy on the white horse to come in and save us. When he comes in and things don't work according to his formula, he has an out clause. I'll pay you so much rent for so many years, but I'm out of here. That's where the food desert. When I say it, you can define it technically, or you can define it in a reality way. It's literally a place where there's no access to fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and all the things that are needful for the health and welfare of the residents around them.
Good point, because it's very essential that we all have fresh fruits and vegetables to sustain life. We have to have the nutrition from these items to sustain ourselves. And in terms of the food desert, you don't have those things. Like Dr. Sykes said, if you have a grocery store, such as Publix, Winn-Dixie, or what have you, in the African-American community, low-income community, generally, the products are less quality than elsewhere. Right. Elsewhere, the meats, I was told, on 18th Avenue, the store that was there. What was the last store there? The last one that was there.
Walmart.
Not Walmart, the one before Walmart.
Sweet Bay.
Sweet Bay. I was told that some of the items there were outdated and they were being repackaged with new dates, so forth and so on. Now, that type of franchise, that type of operation doesn't need to be anywhere. Definitely not in our community. But the co-op that you spoke of, how far along are they?
They are, and I just got off the phone with Erica Hardison. I had her on an interview at one point. It's moving slowly because they don't have a location And as time goes on, it's less affordable. But the way it works is that you buy into it for about $250
Mhm.
and you can maintain, it's like a membership, and you have access to those groceries and they pay dividends. And at any point you want to withdraw your minimal investment, you can do that. But what it does, it creates a network of people and products that are brought in. And now what's happening is Erica and those that work with her, they'll have at the weekend market with Renee and those, they'll have a pop-up there where they'll have their products. I offered them our area for another type of display, advertise the date and so forth so they can come in. But the truth of the matter is we have a large empty former grocery store that the city is maintaining with the rent that was agreed upon before at the beginning of the negotiation, and it's sitting there and it can be used for that purpose. And it can be used in a small way. In other words, you build it out as you go. Then you have a location, you have a place in the community where people can go and shop. And the products of this co-op are guaranteed to be healthy and drug-free. Because with us leading in every indicator of poor health, we need access to fresh things. And the co-op is a small effort that has great potential to do something about it.
Yeah, a food desert, people need to understand a food desert really is hazardous to our health. Because if we're not getting, as I stated earlier, the nutritious items that we need to sustain our physical being, there's going to be an adverse effect on our health.
Mm-hmm.
So, Michelle, what are your thoughts in terms of why the former Sweet Bay is just sitting there like that?
That might be a little personal.
I know when I asked her it was going to be personal, but I think there's something she can say.
Oh, for
I'm
sure.
going to say this, to the extent that there is a will, there's a way.
Right.
And we have to work collectively to make sure that we're getting what we see as viable, and to make sure that, as opposed to being the critic, we're also a contributor. And the ability to contribute to city policy practice is just as important as policy. And we have to make sure that it's uniform. Now, the availability of that building is entangled in a number of documents. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
And but is it there? Yes, it is. Is it in use? No, it isn't. And it hasn't been for many years. And that's to the detriment of the community that was built to serve.
Right.
So there's a different way that we can get this done. We can make it a profitable enterprise. It just takes a little bit of creativity. Conversations such as this is a good starting point, but we've got to be able to carry through the concept all the way to completion. And we don't do that as a city on a regular basis on fundamental things. There's not going to be a big parade necessarily that says this grocery store is open and it sells organic foods. That's probably not going to happen. It may have a couple of banners. There may be a pop-up with one of the radio stations or something like that. Matter of fact, that's a good idea. That's one way to call the pressure to having it open. So maybe if we had that in advance, the attention would be directed to that as an opportunity. I, for one, think that if one person is committed, you automatically attract someone else, if only to see what you're doing. And so what we have to do is be receptive to change, be receptive to another way of getting some things done, and we can make it happen. If you've got the vegetables and you got the meat, you got a store.
Okay, let me say this, please. It's been called to my attention that time is upon us. We're going to have to bring this one to an end. This is a discussion that I knew would be strong and powerful. I said it earlier, but I was alerted to the fact that we need to close it out. And being that the case, I want to say to my co-host, thanks again for the talents that you bring to these discussions, to our guests. Attorney Ligon, Dr. Sykes. Oh, you two have been awesome, as I knew you would be, But the subjects that we've tackled already, we need to stay on these subjects. This is not a once and done type discussion. So thanks to the two of you. Thanks to our listening audience. We really appreciate you tuning in to the Ray Tampa Podcast, 99.1 FM The Berg. And you may also go to YouTube, type in the Ray Tampa Podcast, and you can see them all right there. And to our listening audience, we always appreciate your participation, your listening, your tuning in, what have you, because without you, there would be no us. At this point, sponsorships are welcome. Good evening.
Good evening.